Alright you guys, what is going on? Welcome back to Magic the Gathering Custom Deck Builds. Today, I'm going over my first commander deck, which is Karametra, God of Harvests. He costs 3, a green and a white, for a legendary enchantment creature, God. He's indestructible. As long as your devotion to green and white is less than 7, Karametra isn't a creature. Whenever you cast a creature spell, you may search your library for a forest or plains card, put it onto the battlefield tapped, then shuffle your library. Now, the basis behind my version of this deck is to either go wide or go big. I cannot necessarily do both with this. It's kind of one or the other because I don't have all of the cards set up yet for this. I'll have an upgrade video maybe next week. I'm not quite sure yet. We'll have to see what 2020 decides to do next. So let's jump right in, guys. So I'm going to split this video up into 5 different parts. It's not going to be super long. It's just a deck tech. So we're going to start with the enchantment side of things, moving to the go wide state of board, and then into the go big side of things, into lands, and then other cards worth mentioning that are in the deck. And then at the end of it, I will go over a couple of cards I would like to put in, but do not currently have. So let's get started. In front of me, I have the 5 cards, in this deck at least, that are enchantment specific, whether they have a constellation effect or just have things to do with enchantments. I've got the creatures in here that deal with that. So first up, most importantly, I have Siona, Captain of the Pyles. She's 1 green and a white for a legendary creature, human soldier. She's a 2/2. When Siona enters the battlefield, look at the top 7 cards of your library. You may reveal an aura card from among them and put it into your hand. Put the rest on the bottom in a random order. And whenever an aura you control becomes attached to a creature you control, create a 1/1 white human soldier creature token. So she wants you to play auras and attach them to make your board state wide. Kind of looks like Wonder Woman. Not gonna lie, I like just now caught that. Interesting. So there's the first one. The next one I'm going to mention is Citizen Skirmisher. It's 1 and a green for a 2/1 human warrior. Constellation. Whenever an enchantment enters the battlefield under your control, Citizen Skirmisher gets +1/+1 until end of turn. So this, paired with the attaching of auras from Siona and such, can make this quite large if you do it right. My next card is also a constellation card. Nexus Wardens, 2 and a green for a 1/4 Satyr Archer with reach. Has constellation. Whenever an enchantment enters the battlefield under your control, you gain 2 life, which is helpful in a green-white deck. You got some life gain, which also revolves around enchantments, which is probably going to be my next build for this if I get around to improving it the way I want to. So the best card I have in here that pairs up with Siona is Transcendent Envoy, 1 and a white for a 1/2 enchantment creature griffin. It has flying. It says aura spells you cast cost 1 less to cast, which cheapens the cost of all of those, meaning your auras are more easily accessible to pair up and create your board state. The last card on my list, at least for what I have in here, is Satyr Enchanter, 1 a green and a white for a 2/2 Satyr Druid. Whenever you cast an enchantment spell, draw a card. There is actually quite a few card draw engines in the different categories here. You'll notice when I do something, draw a card, or when something enters, draw a card. You'll see that as a reoccurring theme throughout this deck tech. So let's move along. Okay, so now we get into the go wide portion of the commander deck. I'm going to pick out a couple of cards here that I think are better than others in this situation, but we'll just let's get right into this. So first up, I have Curious Pair. This is my showcase card, or one of. It's 1 and a green for a human peasant. Has the adventure side for 1 green, sorcery. Create a food token, which is a artifact that says pay 2, sacrifice this. you gain 3 life. So a little bit more life gain there. You can also just pay 1 and a green for the Curious Pair, and it's a 1/3. So cheap creatures. My next card here is going to be Soul Mender, which is 1 white for a 1/1 human cleric, and you can tap it to gain a life. So early game, if you tap it enough times, you might be able to get somewhere with it. My next one I'm going to put up is Springbloom Druid. It is 2 and a green for a 1/1 elf druid. When it enters the battlefield, you may sacrifice a land. If you do, search your library for up to 2 basic land cards, put them onto the battlefield tapped, then shuffle your library. So this helps with ramping or mana fixing, whichever you need to use it for. I wish I had more. I would put this in like any 3-color deck that ran green that I have. So, yeah, it just helps with mana. The next card I'm going to put on here is Victory's Envoy, which is 3 white, so 5 total for a human cleric as a 3/3. At the beginning of your upkeep, put a +1/+1 counter on each other creature you control. So with a wide enough board state, you're just pumping everything when your turn starts. So I thought that was pretty good. Speaking of pumping everything, I'm going to bring out a couple of cards here. The first one is going to be Pledge of Unity, which is 1 a green and a white for an instant. It says put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control. You gain 1 life for each creature you control. On a wide enough board state, this is super powerful. The next card kind of helps with pumping is Renata, Called to the Hunt. 2 green for a legendary enchantment creature demigod. How in the world did they fit that on one line? That's impressive. For a star 3, Renata's power is equal to your devotion to green. So the more green stuff you have on the field, the more power this creature has. Each other creature you control enters the battlefield with an additional +1/+1 counter on it. Now there is a slight synergy here if I can find it. We've got the last ability. Enters with an additional +1/+1 counter on it. What I pair that with, which is especially good here, is Incubation Druid, 1 and a green for a 0/2 elf druid. You can tap it to add 1 mana of any type that a land you control could produce. If Incubation Druid has a +1/+1 counter on it, add 3 mana of that type instead. You can also pay 5 to put 3 +1/+1s on it. But the idea is if you have Renata out, and then you play Incubation Druid, it will enter with the +1/+1, meaning you can tap it for 3 anyway. So there's a little synergy for you. The next card I've got is Tireless Tracker. 2 and a green for a 3/2 human scout. Whenever land enters the battlefield under your control, investigate. So I put a clue on the battlefield with pay 2, sacrifice the artifact, draw a card. Whenever you sacrifice a clue, put a +1/+1 counter on Tireless Tracker. So it's got a landfall trigger, and you can draw some cards off of it to make it bigger. The last card I've got for going wide, which I mean this could honestly go either way, is Uncage the Menagerie for X green for sorcery. Search your library for up to X creature cards with different names that each have converted mana cost X, which is how much you pay, -2. Reveal them, put them into your hand, then shuffle. So I usually go for 4 or 5 because I don't have too many giant things in this deck. Most of my stuff is mid-game or early game, so I usually aim for the lower numbers so I can cast this earlier in the game, get more creatures, and hopefully increase the board state early enough to take out my opponents. Alright, we're going to move on to going big. Okay, so moving on to going big, or going home, which is the end game of this deck, is to get big enough stuff out and you can just kind of crush people from there. So a couple of things that will help with that first is Altar of the Pantheon, one of my favorite commons of all time to run a commander, especially with god decks. It's 3 mana for an artifact. Your devotion to each color and each combination of colors is increased by 1. You can tap it to add 1 mana of any color. If you control a god, a demigod, or legendary enchantment, you gain 1 life. Now this being a Karametra deck, he is an enchantment, legendary enchantment, and a god. So technically, if you have him on the field, even if he's not a creature, he isn't a legendary enchantment, you still can gain a life from tapping this. Also increases devotion, so your chance of Karametra being a creature is greater, which is really nice. The next card, before we get into some of the creatures, is Cultivate. Pretty standard commander staple. 2 and a green for sorcery. Search your library for up to 2 basic land cards. Reveal those cards. Put one onto the battlefield tapped and the other in your hand. Then shuffle. So just gets some more mana out and gets you land for other turns if you have other cards in, like Tireless Tracker or something like that. Rampaging Baelofs, maybe, if you're into lands matter decks. So moving on to creatures, I'm going to start with the biggest one in the deck, which is Titanith Rex. 7 green, so 9 total, for a 11/11 dinosaur beast with trample. Has the ability cycling for 1 and a green, discard this card, draw a card. When you cycle Titanith Rex, put a trample counter on target creature you control. Now, I usually can just play this as an 11/11 with trample, with enough lands late in the game. But sometimes you just want to put trample on something else, like one of these other cards that I have that doesn't already have trample. So, it's always good. Emergency trample if you need it. The next card I'm going to pull out is Tree Shaker Chimera. 5 green, so 7 total, for a 8/5 Chimera. All creatures able to block Tree Shaker Chimera do so. When Tree Shaker Chimera dies, draw 3 cards. So even if you play it and it just gets murdered, you can still make something out of it, and you get to draw 3 cards. So it's okay. Next up is Zatalpa, Primal Dawn. 6 white, 8 total, for a 4/8 legendary creature, Elder Dinosaur. I used to want this card forever back when I had a Gishoth commander deck. This was one of the cards I always wanted but could never buy, and then they reprinted him, and now he's not worth anything, and well, here we are. So he's a 4/8, he's got flying, double strike, which basically just makes him an 8/8, vigilance, trample, and indestructible. I think they might throw a couple more keywords on him if he ever gets reprinted again, yeah? My last card for the Go Big strategy is Akroma, Angel of Wrath. 5 and white, so 8 total, for a legendary creature, Angel. She has flying, first strike, vigilance, trample, haste, protection from black and red. She's a 6/6. So you could shove just about anything in her way and she'll take it out. So good luck. Alright, let's get a move on to the lands, shall we? Okay, you guys, we're going to get into lands. This one won't take very long at all. It's pretty basic. You have plains, you have forests. Some lands worth mentioning. I have Croson Verge, which is enters tapped. You can tap it for colorless, or you can pay 2, sacrifice it, search your library for a forest and a plains card, put them onto the battlefield tapped, then shuffle your library. Essentially, it's a land that can be used as a later, slightly more efficient cultivate, kind of. But with this, you can find not just basics, so a forest and a plains. So you could find Temple Garden or maybe a Scryland or something along those lines if you wanted to. Last land here, like I said, it was going to be quick, is Canopy Vista. It is a forest plain, so it is findable with Croson Verge if you want. Enters tapped, unless you control 2 or more basic lands, which is not too hard to do, especially with the strategy of this deck to ramp into lands. So let's get a move on. I'll get into other cards that are interesting in the deck and worth mentioning, and then I'll look at wrapping it up. See you guys in a second. Alright, you guys, so these are going to be 10 cards worth mentioning in no particular order that are contained within this deck that can help you to win in certain different ways. So let's get started. The first card is Guardian Project. 3 and a green for an enchantment. Whenever a non-token creature enters the battlefield under your control, if it doesn't have the same name as another creature you control or a creature card in your graveyard, draw a card. Now this is really overpowered in Commander because you're only allowed to have one of any card except for basic lands in a deck. So anything you play will have a different name than something you control or in your graveyard. You'll draw a card no matter what. So that's a pretty good card there. My next card is a Johnny Unyielding. He is 4 a green and a white for a legendary planeswalker, a Johnny. He comes in with 4 loyalty. His +2 says, reveal the top 3 cards of your library, put all non-land permanent cards revealed this way into your hand, and the rest on the bottom of your library in any order. So potential to get 3 cards into your hand, or none, like I did earlier today when I pulled a land and 2 spells. It did not go very well. His -2 is exile target creature. Its controller gains life equal to its power. And his ultimate -9 says put 5 +1/+1 counters on each creature you control and 5 loyalty counters on each other planeswalker you control. So if you have lots of planeswalkers and lots of creatures, if you went wide with the strategy here, this thing pumps it by a ton. And it's just really nice to have to get a big board like that all of a sudden. People tend to forget about it. So next card is Beast Whisperer. He's 2 green and green for a 2/3 elf druid. Whenever you cast a creature spell, draw a card. Now this pairs nicely with the next card I'm going to pull out here, which is Ronus' Monument. 3 mana for a legendary artifact. Green creature spells you cast cost 1 less to cast. Whenever you cast a creature spell, target creature you control gets +2/+2 and gains trample until end of turn. Another card I've got, this is more for the go wide, is Overcome. 3 green and a green for a sorcery. Creatures you control get +2/+2 and gain trample until end of turn. I guess I kind of overlooked the amount of trample that can go in this deck. So if you want to go smash some people, go for it. Alright, next card I'm going to bring up. Really annoyed my friend earlier today when we played. Archon of Valor's Reach. 4 green and a white for a 5/6 creature Archon. Flying, Vigilance, and Trample. As it enters the battlefield, choose Artifact, Enchantment, Instant, Sorcery, or Planeswalker. Players can't cast spells of the chosen type. Now when we played, he was playing a Lord Windgrace type deck, and he kept the threat of a Crux of Fate, which destroys all non-dragon creatures or all dragon creatures, depending on what option you pick. He was going to go with non-dragon because he had Corvold on the field as well, which would have blown everything up. Now I played this just to make him a little bit angry, and chose Sorcery, so he could not hold up the threat. I then proceeded to win as he conceded once this card had come down. I had also originally in this deck, which was really toxic, so I ended up taking it out. So I had originally played and had in this deck Overwhelming Splendor, which is 6 white for an enchantment or a curse. Enchant player. Creatures enchanted player controls lose all abilities and have base power and toughness of 1/1. Enchanted player can't activate abilities that aren't mana or loyalty abilities. So they can still use planeswalkers, they can still use mana abilities, but they cannot activate other abilities like tapping and stuff like that. Well, tapping wouldn't even matter because all the creatures lose their abilities. So I had played this on him fairly early in the game, and then proceeded to finish him off with the Archon, not allowing him to hold up the threat of Crux of Fate, and then he promptly conceded after that. So moving on, with other cards worth mentioning, I have in here Hour of Revelation, which normally costs 3 white, so 6 total for a sorcery, to destroy all non-land permanents, but it can cost 3 less if there are 10 or more non-land permanents on the battlefield, which with the go wide is not hard to do. Now it just says on the battlefield, so this counts your opponents as well. So in a multiplayer game, it's a 3 mana destroy all non-land permanents. It seems pretty good to me. The next card I have here, worth mentioning, the miscellaneous category, is the Mending of Dominaria, 3 green and a green for an enchantment saga. The first 2 chapters say put the top 2 cards of your library into your graveyard, then you may return a creature card from your graveyard to your hand, which is decent. And then the third chapter here says return all land cards from your graveyard to the battlefield, then shuffle your graveyard into your library. That does not count the saga. I had to look up the ruling for that. This triggers you return the graveyard and then you sacrifice the enchantment. So just in case, don't spam the comments, all 2 of you who are subbed to me. Whatever. Next card I've got in here is Solemnity. 2 and a white for an enchantment. Players can't get counters. Counters cannot be put on artifacts, creatures, enchantments, or lands. So if you have storage lands, no counters. You want to play Infect? No counters. You want to proliferate? No counters. Just don't. Also, no sagas. I just realized enchantments, you can't do counters. So, Hangerback Walker? No thank you. No counters. No counters for you either. Walking Ballista? Nope. Chalice? Nuh-uh. Not gonna happen. No counters here. We don't do that. Last card I have worth mentioning in this deck is Nyx Lotus. 4 mana for a legendary artifact. Enters tapped. You can tap. Choose a color. Add an amount of mana of that color equal to your devotion to that color. So either being green or white in this deck. I would suggest green because you can generally do more with it, or white depending on your situation, whether you are going big or trying to be a little bit more control-y, because there are some enchantments and or spells in here that will control the board pretty well. So let's get to wrapping this up. Before I wrap things up, I said I would go through some cards that I would like to add but do not currently have. I ended up having one of them after a brief look through my collection. That is kind of just this wall of cards here that are all bundled up and around. So I found one that I would like to put in, the others I do not, so I'll be putting visuals up on the screen because I don't own them, so I can't really show it to you. So the one I found was Collective Blessing, which is 3 green, green, white, so 6 total for an enchantment. It says creatures you control get +3/+3. Yeah, this one is pretty good for the go wide. It also allows you to go big and go wide. So that one will go in the deck. The other cards worth mentioning that I want to add are, including not limited to, Mirari's Wake, Ghostly Prison, Windswept Heath, Temple Garden, Avenger of Zendikar, and a Johnny Mentor of Heroes for the life gain and making things bigger. So that's all I've got for now. Let's wrap this thing up. Alright you guys, thank you for watching. If you enjoyed what you saw, go ahead and like, share, subscribe, ring the bell, do your thing. Feel free to leave deck ideas in the comments. And yeah, that'll do it for me. See you guys in the next one.